Before we go anywhere, I want to know something. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city, drop your country in the comments below. I genuinely read every single one. Every single one. It blows my mind every time. And hey, one more thing. What time is it where you are right now? Because I love knowing that someone is watching this at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and someone else is watching it at midnight with all the lights off. Drop the time too. Let me see it. Today's like goal is 20. That's it. Just 20. If you think what you're about to hear deserves even one of those 20, hit the like button. Let's see if we can do it together. And if you're new here and you like mysteries that actually happened, that are documented, that have real names and real dates attached to them, hit subscribe. That is exactly what this channel is. Now, let's go back to 1938, to a mountain range so high that the air itself becomes thin enough to cause hallucinations, to a cave that had no name on any map the expedition was carrying, and to 5 men who went in, and only 4 of them were willing to talk about what they saw inside. It is December 1938. The air is so thin up here that your lungs never feel full. You breathe and it never quite satisfies. The temperature at night drops to -20 Celsius. The wind does not blow. It pushes. It leans against you like something that wants you gone. 5 men have been moving through this terrain for weeks. They are scientists. They are SS officers. They carry cameras, measurement instruments, specimen cases, and weapons. They are on a mission that was approved by the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany. And tonight, on the edge of a glacier southeast of Lhasa, one of them finds something, a fissure in the rock face, a gap just wide enough to enter. Cold air exhaling from the inside, which means the cave goes deeper than it looks, much deeper. He calls the others over. They go in, and whatever is in there does not move when they shine their lights on it. It does not flee. It does not make a sound. It just waits for what they actually see. To understand what happened in that cave, you need to understand what that expedition actually was. Because it was one of the strangest official scientific missions in the history of the 20th century. In April of 1938, 5 men crossed the border into Tibet under the direct patronage of Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer SS of Nazi Germany. Their names are documented in the Bundesarchiv in Germany. They were Ernst Schäfer, a zoologist and SS Sturmbannführer who led the mission; Bruno Beger, an anthropologist who believed Tibet held the biological origin of the Aryan race; Karl Wienert, a geophysicist; Ernst Krause, an entomologist and photographer; and Edmund Geer, the technical director. The expedition was organized under the Ahnenerbe, the SS Ancestral Heritage Institute, an organization founded by Himmler in 1935 to find scientific proof for Nazi racial ideology. The Ahnenerbe funded research into archaeology, folklore, linguistics, and what Himmler called the lost knowledge of the Aryan ancestors. Tibet was chosen because Himmler was obsessed with a pseudoscientific theory called glacial cosmogony, developed by Austrian engineer Hans Herbiger, which claimed that ice was the fundamental substance of the universe, and that somewhere in the frozen high-altitude wilderness of Central Asia, evidence of a primordial Aryan civilization still waited to be found. The British government knew about the expedition. Documents held in the British Library's Oriental and India Office collection show that London was concerned, but ultimately allowed it to proceed for diplomatic reasons. The expedition arrived in Lhasa on January 19, 1939, and spent months moving through the region, collecting specimens, taking measurements, filming everything. Thousands of photographs were taken, animal specimens, geological data, measurements of Tibetan skulls, which Beger carried out with a cold and clinical thoroughness that still disturbs historians today. But here is the part that the official expedition reports don't fully account for. In the winter months, before the team reached Lhasa, they spent several weeks moving through the high terrain southeast of the Yarlung Sangpo Valley. Remote, glaciated, the kind of altitude where the human body starts doing things the human mind did not ask it to do. And it was there, in that terrain, that something happened that Schäfer's official field notes, held in the Bundesarchiv, Describe in language that is unusually brief for a man who wrote in exhausting detail about everything else. A single entry, 4 lines, and then nothing. But it was not the cold these men feared most out there on the edge of the glacier. Ernst Krause was the expedition's photographer and entomologist. He had been at the front of scientific fieldwork for years. He was trained to observe, trained to record, trained not to let the environment distort what his eyes actually saw. After the war, Krause gave several interviews about the Tibet expedition. Most of what he said matched the official record. But in one recorded conversation, cited by researcher Christopher Hale in his 2003 book Himmler's Crusade, published by Bantam Books, Krause mentioned an incident that does not appear in the official expedition film or in Schaefer's published memoirs. It happened on a night in late November or early December 1938. The team had made camp near a rock formation at high altitude in a valley with no name on the maps they were carrying. Krause wrote in a personal letter, one that remained in family possession for decades, that he had gone out from camp alone to check a series of specimen traps he had set the previous day. The temperature was severe. He described his breath freezing on the fabric of his collar. The moon was present but low, and the glacier above them caught and reflected its light in a way that made the entire valley feel lit from within. He found the traps. Most were empty. On the way back he stopped. There was an opening in the rock face to his left that he did not remember from the approach. A fissure, the kind that forms in high-altitude limestone when centuries of freeze and thaw work the stone apart from the inside. He estimated it was perhaps 2 meters high and 1 meter wide at the narrowest point. What stopped him was the air, warm air, coming out of the rock in December at altitude. Warm air exhaling from the inside of a mountain. He wrote, and I am paraphrasing from the translated passage Hale cites, that his scientific instinct told him to document it, that there were geological explanations, geothermal activity, deep cave systems that maintained a stable temperature regardless of the surface cold. He stepped inside. The cave went back further than his light reached. The floor was smooth, too smooth, he noted, for natural erosion alone. He walked perhaps 40 meters in before his lamp began to dim, and then he saw something at the edge of his light, large, still, and shaped in a way that his brain, for a full several seconds, refused to categorize. He did not run. He said he could not. He described a kind of freezing, not of the body, but of decision, as if the part of the mind that chooses what to do next had simply stopped. Then his lamp went out. He made it back to camp. He did not tell Schaefer what he had seen. Not that night. Hold on, I have to ask. What do you think Krause saw? Right now, before we go any further, drop it in the comments. Was it psychological? Something geological? An animal? Or something that doesn't have a name yet? I want to see where this audience lands. Go. Okay, let's see what the records actually say. The following morning, Krause tells Schaefer. Schaefer does not dismiss it. According to Baker's diary, published 60 years later under the title Mit der deutschen Tibet-Expedition Ernst Schaefer 1938-39 nach Lhasa, Schaefer is, in Baker's words, immediately and unusually interested. He organizes a return to the cave that same afternoon. 4 of the 5 men go. Gear stays at camp with the equipment. It is 1400 hours. The light is still good. They find the fissure exactly where Krause described it. The warm air is still there, still exhaling. Schaefer measures the temperature differential with his instruments. The air coming from the cave is approximately 8 degrees Celsius warmer than the outside air. He writes this number down. It is in the official field notes. That measurement is real. They go in. Schaefer leads. Krause is second. Berger and Wienert follow. The cave floor is, as Krause described, unusually smooth. Wienert, the geophysicist, crouches and runs his hand across it. He says something in German that Berger later transcribes. The translation is approximately, this has been worked. Not formed, not eroded, worked. They move deeper. Schaefer's lamp is strong, a proper expedition-grade acetylene lamp. It reaches perhaps 60 meters. The cave narrows slightly, then opens again into a wider chamber. And there, at the far wall of that chamber, is what Krause saw the night before. It is not moving. Baker's diary describes it as And again, I am paraphrasing from the published text, something of considerable size, standing or resting in a vertical posture against the stone, of a coloration that is neither white nor gray but something between the two, and of a shape that none of us could agree upon in the moment. Schaefer fires once into the cave ceiling. The report of the shot is enormous in that enclosed space. The echo comes back 3, 4, 5 times. Whatever is at the far wall does not move, does not flinch, does not make a sound, and then Wienert's lamp begins to flicker and beggars, and within 30 seconds, all 4 lamps are giving reduced light, not dead, dimmed, as if something in the air of that inner chamber is affecting the burn. Schaefer gives the order to withdraw. They do not run. He is specific about this in what little he does write. They walk out, calmly, Schaefer last. Outside, in the full afternoon light of the glacier valley, all 4 lamps immediately return to full brightness. None of them speak on the way back to camp. That night, Schaefer writes 4 lines in his field notes and then draws a single horizontal line beneath them. As if closing the subject, those 4 lines translated from German read, "Cave system located, southeast face. Geothermal activity confirmed. Interior examination conducted. No further investigation recommended." That is all he wrote. Here is where the story stops being a single strange night and starts being something more difficult to dismiss. Because Schaefer and his team were not the first people to describe something in those caves. The Bön religion is Tibet's pre-Buddhist spiritual tradition, older than Tibetan Buddhism by centuries. Bön practitioners described a class of mountain beings called Mira God, the wild man of the heights. Unlike the Western concept of a monster, the Mira God in Bön tradition was understood as a guardian entity, something that existed at the threshold between the physical world and the spiritual one. It was not sought, it was not provoked. Bön texts describe specific types of terrain associated with Mira God presence. High-altitude cave systems, particularly those with geothermal warmth in cold environments. The match with the terrain Schaefer's team described is precise. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Howard Bury led the first British reconnaissance expedition to Everest in 1921. His team reported strange footprints at altitude that their Sherpa guides identified without hesitation as the tracks of a metokangmi, a Tibetan term that was later mistranslated into English as abominable snowman. Howard Bury himself was skeptical but included the report in his official expedition account, published by Edward Arnold in 1922. The key detail: his Sherpa guides did not treat the tracks as a curiosity. They treated them as a warning. They altered the route. This is the detail that is most often overlooked. Schaefer had been to Tibet before. His second expedition between 1934 and 1936 traveled through some of the same high-altitude terrain. In a post-war interview, he acknowledged that local guides on that earlier expedition had refused to approach certain cave systems in the same general region. He attributed it at the time to superstition. After 1938, he did not comment on that attribution again. Bruno Beger's expedition diary, published in Germany in 1998 under the title Mit der deutschen Tibet-Expedition Ernst Schaefer, 1938-39 nach Lhasa, contains one passage that does not appear in any of the official expedition materials. Writing about the days following the cave incident, Beger notes that the Tibetan liaison assigned to guide the expedition through the region asked Schaefer, through an interpreter, whether they had entered the warm cave on the southeast face. When Schaefer confirmed that they had, the guide walked away from the camp and did not return until the following morning. He offered no explanation. Beger writes, "He seemed not angry. He seemed afraid on our behalf." The sightings described across these multiple sources, the Bön oral tradition, the 1921 British expedition report, Schaefer's 1934 guides, and the 1938 incident, all cluster in the same geographic corridor, the high-altitude terrain southeast and east of Lhasa, in the zone between the Yarlung Sangpo Valley and the approaches to the Himalayan main range. The same terrain, the same type of cave formation, the same behavioral signature, something that does not react to noise, does not react to light, and does not leave the space it occupies. This was not one frightened man in the dark. This was a pattern. Across different people, different eras, different languages, and different reasons to be in that place. So, what are we actually dealing with? There are 4 credible frameworks for explaining what Schaefer's team encountered. I am going to give each one of them its full argument, because none of them is stupid, and none of them is complete. At extreme altitude, the human brain begins to malfunction in documented and well-studied ways. Hypoxia, oxygen deprivation, causes visual disturbances, auditory hallucinations, and a documented phenomenon called threat projection, in which the mind interprets ambiguous shapes as the most dangerous possibility available to it. Researchers studying high-altitude cognitive effects, including work published in the journal High Altitude Medicine and Biology, have recorded cases where experienced mountaineers reported seeing human figures, animals, and structured shapes that physical inspection revealed to be rock formations or ice structures. 4 men, all experiencing the same hypoxia, in a confined space with limited light, could plausibly construct a shared visual experience that felt absolutely real. The problem with this theory is a single specific detail. Wienert's observation that the cave floor appeared to have been worked. A geophysicist does not hallucinate a professional assessment. The Tibetan brown bear, Ursus arctos pruitinosus, is a large, poorly documented subspecies that inhabits exactly the kind of high-altitude terrain the expedition was moving through. Schaefer himself, in his post-war writings, argued that the Yeti legend was almost certainly explained by this animal. A large bear, deep in a cave with geothermal warmth, in hibernation or near hibernation, would be motionless, would not react to a gunshot, would appear in poor light as a large pale shape against the cave wall. DNA analysis conducted on samples labeled as Yeti specimens, including material that passed through the hands of Schaefer's own expedition, was published by researcher Charlotte Lindqvist in 2017 and identified the biological source as Tibetan brown bear or Himalayan brown bear in nearly every tested case. The weakness in this theory: a hibernating bear does not produce a cave floor that a trained geophysicist describes as worked stone. In 1938, Tibet was a contested zone of British, Chinese, and regional influence. The British were aware of the Nazi expedition and had concerns about its true objectives. There were Tibetan political factions that did not welcome foreign presence in the sacred terrain near Lhasa. A staged encounter, a fabricated display designed to frighten the expedition away from a specific area, is not without precedent in the history of territorial protection. The problem: the Miorgod tradition in Bun texts predates any 20th century political calculation by centuries. You cannot stage a legend that old to deter a single expedition. This is the theory that requires the least invention and produces the most discomfort. The Bun religious tradition of Tibet, predating Buddhist influence, described warm cave-dwelling mountain guardians in exactly the terrain the Schaefer expedition entered. The Lepcha people of the Himalayan foothills described a glacier being revered as a god of the hunt. The Sherpa concept of the Yeti was not, in its original form, a monster story. It was a description of something that existed at the border of the physical and spiritual worlds. In some Tibetan Buddhist interpretations documented by anthropologist Daniel Kapper, the entity is described as a being that sometimes follows Dharma and appears in 4 different aspects depending on the spiritual condition of the observer. None of this is the frightened campfire story the Western world made of it later. These are structured, ancient, internally consistent descriptions of something these cultures encountered regularly enough to develop theology around. The Schaefer expedition did not discover something new. They walked into a place where something very old had been waiting for a very long time. None of these 4 theories fully accounts for what 4 trained observers, men who had faced hostile terrain, dangerous wildlife, and the political pressure of representing Nazi Germany abroad, said they encountered in that cave. None of them. Stay with me. Because the final account, the one that only came to light when post-war documents were reviewed by historians in the 1990s, is unlike anything we have covered so far. and it comes from the one member of the expedition who was not in that cave. Thank you, genuinely. Hit that like button right now if this story is sitting with you. Let's keep going. Edmund Gear stayed at camp. He was the expedition's technical director, not a scientist in the field sense, more an engineer, a logistics man, the one who made sure the equipment kept working and the camp stayed functional. He was the only member of the team who did not enter the cave. His post-war testimony, given as part of a German academic review of the expedition in the 1990s and cited in research published in the journal Revue d'études tibétaines, describes what he observed from the camp while the others were inside. He describes the 4 men entering the fissure. He marks the time. He goes back to his work. Approximately 20 minutes later, he says he heard the gunshot from inside the mountain. 1 shot. The echo traveled through the rock and he felt it more than heard it. He stood up and watched the entrance. The 4 men came out approximately 5 minutes after the shot. He noted their pace. He noted their posture. He noted that none of them looked at each other. And then he noted something else. He writes, and the English translation of the relevant passage reads approximately as follows: that before the 4 men emerged, and for perhaps 10 to 15 seconds after the gunshot echo faded, he observed what he describes as a column of disturbed air at the entrance to the fissure. Not smoke, not dust. He was precise about this, not anything that had a physical cause he could identify, just a quality of the air at the cave entrance that was, in his word, wrong. As if something at the threshold was. He stops the sentence there. In the original German transcription of his testimony, the sentence is unfinished. The academic reviewer noted it. There is no completion, just a dash. And then Gear moves to the next observation without returning to it. As if even the words, all those decades later, were not something he was willing to finish. The expedition left that valley the following morning. They proceeded to Lhasa, where they arrived on January 19, 1939, and continued their official scientific work. The photographs they took in Lhasa are extraordinary. The geomagnetic data Wienert collected is still cited in geophysical research today. The expedition, by any official measure, was a scientific success, but the cave on the southeast face does not appear in the expedition film. It does not appear in the official scientific summary published on their return to Germany. And when Christopher Hale researched the expedition for his 2003 book, he noted that Schäfer, when interviewed before his death in 1992, would speak at length about every aspect of the mission, except the weeks before Lhasa. Those weeks Schäfer described as uneventful. Here is the thing about trained observers. Schäfer had spent years in the field before 1938. He had hunted in remote terrain across 2 continents. He had seen dangerous animals, extreme weather, and the full range of what remote wilderness produces in the human mind under stress. Beguer was an anthropologist trained to distinguish physical reality from cultural projection. Wienert was a geophysicist whose entire professional discipline was built on the accurate measurement of what is actually there. Krause had been photographing the natural world for years. These were not men who frightened easily. They were not men who invented stories. They were not, by any measure, men who would collectively agree to fabricate an account that served no purpose, and which they subsequently, all of them, chose never to formally report. And yet none of them reported it, which means one of 2 things. Either what they saw was so explicable, so ordinary, that it did not warrant mention, and that explanation requires us to believe that a trained geophysicist's assessment of a worked stone floor was simply wrong, or what they saw was so far outside the categories their scientific training had given them that the only rational response was silence. The Tibetan people who lived in that region had a word for it. They had rituals around it. They had theology built to account for it. They had been living alongside whatever is in those caves for so long that they knew, without being told, which specific cave on which specific southeast face to ask about. The Nazis arrived in Tibet with instruments and ideology, and the certainty that science could explain everything. They went to the mountain, they fired a gun, and they walked out all 4 of them, into the afternoon light, and they never spoke of it, not in the official record, not in their memoirs, not in their post-war interviews, not once. Whatever was waiting in that cave had been there before the war began. It will be there long after the last person who remembers this expedition is gone. The question is not whether Schaefer's men saw something real. The question is why the only people who never doubted it were the ones who already knew it was there. 4 men went into a mountain in 1938. All 4 of them came out. None of them ever told anyone what they left behind. Now I want to hear from you. Which theory do you believe? The psychology? The animal? The staged encounter? Or the theory that the oldest people in that region were simply right all along? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Let's talk about this. We set a goal of 10 likes today. Just 10. If we crossed, that is you. That is your support. That is what keeps this channel going. And if we haven't crossed it yet, this is your moment. You know what to do. Next time we go even deeper. A different war, a different continent, and a mystery that governments spent 60 years refusing to officially acknowledge existed. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you in the dark.